In this lesson, we're taking cakes to the next level, and you'll get to meet our ultimate chocolate cake with a gooey chocolate ganache icing. We'll also teach you how to ice and assemble cakes and how to ice using a piping bag. This chocolate cake is a version of the recipe that my mum used to make when I was growing up, and so it kind of tastes like my childhood. It uses the foaming method, which means that you beat together the eggs and the sugar before you carry on with making the rest of the cake, as opposed to the creaming method, which involves whipping together the butter and the sugar. So what you end up with is a really light cake with a gentle crumb. I always think of icing as kind of like putting makeup on a cake. It takes it from barefaced to dazzling in just a few minutes. And to make our chocolate ganache icing, and ganache is really just a fancy French word for gooey, silky chocolate that's been melted down with cream. We start off with about 200 grams of these gorgeous dark chocolate chips. And then about 60 mils of cream. And we just need to gently melt that in a double boiler, which is a heat-proof bowl that's placed over a small amount of gently simmering water. And you want to make sure that the surface of the bowl, or the base of the bowl, doesn't actually touch the bubbling water, because then the chocolate can get too hot and split. So just a very gentle heat and a low simmer. One last thing we need to add in is a little dollop of butter, which adds extra silkiness and shine to the ganache. I've left these cakes to cool completely before icing them, and a nice little trick if you ever need to cool cakes in a hurry is to wrap them in a little bit of cling film and place them in the freezer for a few minutes, and then their temperature will come right down and they'll be ready to ice. So I just need to check on my ganache. Just give it a gentle stir. You don't need to interfere with it too much. It really just needs to be left alone to melt, and what you'll end up with is a whole puddle of dark chocolate. While that's quietly melting away, I'm going to start making our chocolate buttercream. And for that, I need 300 grams of icing sugar and about 150 grams of butter, and then about 80 grams of cocoa powder. So now, to my 300 grams of icing, I'm just adding in the cocoa powder. I just convince these last little bubbles of cocoa powder to go through the sieve using the back of a spoon. Before I add in the icing sugar, I'll just give it a quick mix with the hand mixer to soften up the butter. Okay. And I'll add in the icing sugar and the cocoa in 2 stages. And then just put the mixer on a very low speed, because otherwise you'll end up choking on a cloud of powdered sugar and cocoa powder. And then I'm just adding in about 3 tablespoons of milk, which will bring everything together, and then the remaining icing sugar and cocoa powder. Gently combine it with a spoon. If you need to, just gently scrape down the sides of the bowl to make sure that everything is evenly incorporated. And then give it a really good mix for anywhere between 3 and 5 minutes, and that will give you really pillowy, soft buttercream. And we all know that the icing is the best part of the cake anyway. The buttercream is ready now, And one thing that's helpful to know is that it freezes really well. So you can pop it in a freezer-proof container, and then when you want to use any leftovers next time, you just let them defrost back to room temperature and loosen them with a little bit of hot water or milk, and you've got perfect instant buttercream. And then a second thing is that the usual ratio for buttercream is normally 2 parts of icing sugar, 1 part butter. So say, for example, 200 grams of icing sugar, 100 grams of butter, and then you add in your cocoa powder and a little bit of milk or hot water to bring everything together. And our ganache is all melted now. And what you want to end up with is this beautiful ribbon of melted chocolate. So we're ready to start assembling and icing our ultimate chocolate cake. Now I'm ready to start creating the layers for our cake and slicing them in half, just kind of through their bellies. And I'm lucky enough to have this very nifty cake cutter. But if you don't, you just take a serrated bread knife and hold the cake gently on top and cut through the center. And if you're struggling, you can pop your cake in the freezer for a few minutes so that it firms up, and then it makes it easier to slice. And then gently move this one back to the cooling rack. Bring in the second one. Now it's time for the fun part, when we actually get to start playing with all the chocolate icing that we've been making. And to start off with, I've got my trusty little palette knife, which is not essential, but it's really helpful if you have one. And I always add just a little dollop of icing straight onto the cake stand, which kind of glues the cake down so that it doesn't slide around. And then just scoop over a very generous dollop of buttercream, and that just sandwiches all the layers together. And I'm leaving this as an open layer cake just because I think it looks really pretty, and I like seeing exactly how much buttercream I've put in all the layers. But you can enclose it with icing, and the first thing that you would need to do once you have all the layers is gently cover the outside of the cake with a thin layer of buttercream, and that's called a crumb coat, and it kind of locks in all the crumbs, and then that goes into the fridge, and then you take it out once it's set, and then you add your final layer of icing. Now all that's left to do is add a final crowning glory of this decadent chocolate ganache. For me, this really is a perfect celebration cake. If you're struggling to get smooth, clean strokes while you're icing, you can just dip your palette knife or butter knife into a jug of hot water that you keep at your side. Here I have some of my very tempting little red velvet cupcakes, and I'm ready to ice them using a piping bag. And what I have made is a basic buttercream icing, like I explained earlier, with 2 parts icing sugar and 1 part butter. And I flavored it with a little bit of lemon zest, and it gives a really lovely lightness to the whole flavor of the icing. I'm using a disposable piping bag because it means no mess, no fuss, and you can just throw it away when you're done. So to start off with, I snip off the end of the piping bag, roughly the length of the icing nozzle that I'm going to use. And you just push it through. And then I have a nice little trick to show you how to easily fill your piping bag. Just drop it into a deep glass or a mixing jug, fold down the sides, open it up, and then just scoop in the buttercream. And it's really important that the buttercream is nice and soft and light and at room temperature so that it'll come out of the piping bag nice and smoothly. But you don't want it to be so soft that it doesn't hold its shape, so it kind of needs to be just right. And then just peel the piping bag off the sides of the glass, and then just let everything drop down. And then I just squeeze it over the bowl to make sure that it's running smoothly. So it's all ready to go. You just go round the edge in a kind of concentric circle, and then just pull up as you reach the middle. When you're done with the piping, you can also add things like edible glitter or pretty little confectionery adornments. Thanks for joining us to meet our ultimate chocolate cake and to learn all about icing. And don't forget that there's extra recipes available for you, as well as course notes and some really fun quizzes.